group. Hopefully having lunch doesn't put you to sleep. I know how my voice can sound sometimes. Just before we get started, we'll give a few more people a chance to sign up here. We do have a chat line on this system. We have questions that can be asked. We also encourage you to send us through any questions that you have by email. All of them will be answered after the conclusion of the system. We won't be answering them during the webinar itself, just for obvious logistic reasons, and so we just want to make sure that you get an opportunity to ask those questions if you are so inclined. It looks like we've got about as many people as we have on board for the moment, and if the rest of them show up late, that's up to them, right? Well, we think the message or the invite that you received was rather intriguing. It opened up with precision and harmony. I'm sure the question probably came up, how in the world do we get from precision and harmony to a lighting fixture? We're going to show you. More importantly, we're going to take it a step further and say precision and harmony as it relates to music and architecture. Now, it might at first make sense how precision can relate to architecture, but you're probably asking, how does it relate to music? And the same thing when it comes to harmony. How does that relate to architecture? I can understand how it relates to music. More importantly, what we're going to show you is how all of these elements interconnect and then combine to produce for us something reasonable and exciting in the world of architectural outdoor lighting. So let's start with the first part here, the first segment. We're going to talk about precision and harmony as it relates to music. And to do that, we're going to start off with something that was actually discovered by the ancient Greeks in their quest for the search for the greater elevation, the elevated world of mathematics. What they found was something interesting when it came to the playing of music, whether it was done with a stringed instrument or with a woodwind style instrument. Let's say we take a piece of string, suspend it by 2 points, and pluck it and create a tone that at 100 cycles. It'll produce a musical note. If we then cut that string in half or move the point to which it vibrates in half to where we're only using half the length of that string, pluck it again, it'll vibrate at 200 cycles, and we'll produce the exact same note 1 octave higher. If I do that again, cut that remaining section in half to where I'm only dealing with a quarter of the original length, I will again produce a tone that is exactly the same note, but again, another octave higher, and so on is the way it goes. The Greeks found out that mathematically, these are precise segments between what's called octaves in music. They also found out that if we go back to the original length of string that produced a 100 cycle frequency and divided it into thirds to where we took only 1/3 of that length, it would vibrate at 300 cycles. So there was a precise mathematical relationship as to the vibration of that string, and it would also happen to be because it was a specific length related to the overall length, it created a tone that was pleasing to the ear and harmonious, or a harmonic, of the overall length of the string. And interestingly, you see that in many instruments today, particularly stringed instruments. If you look at a typical guitar, for example, and look at where the string goes over the nut and the bridge, the halfway point of that string is where there's a fret which creates the tone 1 octave higher. It's the exact same note, just 1 octave higher, and the location of all those frets are precisely measured according to a mathematical formula to produce notes that are in harmonics with each other, or they sound proper in relationship to each other. That's something that you can not only hear, but you can see. And to use an example, we're going to do a quick study of the notes in the musical chord C, which is composed of the notes C, E, and G. Particularly, we're going to look at the notes C and G to do this. Now, it's not something you need to hear, but it's something you can see. If I look at the waveform that makes up the notes C and G, and in the representation you see here, the note C is in red, the note G is in green. At first glimpse, it doesn't look like there's much connection between the two. But on closer analysis, what you see is that there's a repeating pattern and a relationship between these two waveforms. About every 3 beats of the green notes or every 2 beats of the red notes, the pattern begins to repeat itself again and again and again. And actually what we have here is a ratio between these two tones of 3:2. For every 3 cycles of the letter G, of the note G, you have 2 cycles of the note C, and that produces a very harmonious sound. It sounds like it's in tune with each other. And this is such a precise element that the human ear can hear as little as 1 cycle per second or 1 hertz difference in the tone, and the sound is very, very dissonant. Now, if I were to take the note G and bring it down a half a tone to an F sharp, which is not a harmonic of the note C, you look at the waveforms laid on top of each other, and an analysis here shows that there is no repetitive pattern as there was in the example above. There's no ratio between these two tones, and as a result, playing these two notes together produces no harmony. So picking 2 random elements that are out of the air in music doesn't give you what you want. It has to be precisely specific ratios or proportions off of a given tone in order to produce something that's harmonious. And this is the case regardless of the form of music we're talking about. If we're talking about rock and roll, if we're talking about symphonic music, music from the great composers, it's all the same. The rhythm, the beat, the interplay of the notes, everything has to be in precise timing with each other. Otherwise, there is no music created. It's just a cacophony of sounds. So the Greeks understood this, and they used a lot of math in trying to figure out what worked for them when it came to music. Interestingly enough, the Greeks were also the purveyors of precision in math when it came to architecture, and indeed to produce harmonious architecture. We're going to give you a couple examples of this, but to start with, we want to find out where the Greeks got this idea that everything had to have precise relationships. Well, they got it from looking at the world around them, things in nature. The human body was a big influence on the ratios or the proportions that they used in figuring or calculating their architecture. And indeed, some of the elements that were there, we wouldn't think of in a daily environment, but we know that they're pleasing to the eye when we see them. For example, when you look at the sculpture here on the left-hand side, you'll notice that there's a number there. Remember this number, 0.618. That's essentially the distance from the foot up to the navel on a person of average height, or the distance from the elbow to the tip of the finger, the distance from the elbow to the wrist. Those are specific proportions in the average person that come into play throughout Greek architecture. And interestingly, to understand this, we're going to relate it back to Greek architecture as embodied in the Parthenon. Now, the Greeks looked for this ratio, these system of ratios, almost to a fault in everything that they did. And they were looking for ratios that were precise elements to each other and found in nature. What they understood was if you took a square that was 1 unit by 1 unit square, and you laid another square next to that to produce a rectangle, though the rectangle mathematically had a relationship there, it didn't look visually pleasing. And worst of all to them, it didn't match the things that they were seeing in nature as far as the ratio was concerned. So they did a little work on this, and they actually laid this out using a piece of rope and then backed into the calculation later. What they did was to take a rectangle that was based on 2 squares, measure one side, and then measure the diagonal created in that rectangle, and then they would take that piece of rope and double it back on itself. Now, mathematically, we have a way to calculate this formula. If we take the short side of the rectangle, the unit of 1, and multiply it times the long side of the rectangle, square the short side and add it to the square of the long side, so 1 squared plus 2 squared equals 5, that gives us the length of the diagonal. Then we can take that diagonal, figure out its length, which is the square root of 5, and add it to the short side of the rectangle, and we come up with a number of 3.236, which doubled back on itself equals 1.618. You notice that 0.618 there? That became, in Greek architecture and Greek mathematics, what they referred to as the golden ratio or the golden proportion. Interestingly enough, it's the exact same thing that we find in architecture today. To show you what that proportion looks like, we'll lay a little rectangle here across the original 2 squares that we had, and that's the dimension of a rectangle that's 1.618 to 1 length to width. Now, kind of looks familiar. If you go out there and measure most doorways, most windows today, that's the basis for which they start. More importantly, when we look at architecture on an even larger scale, much in the way of rectilinear architecture, using squares and rectangles, is based on this golden ratio. And the Greeks were the ones who found this. In fact, the tower of the UN building is nothing more than just the golden ratio repeated over a number of times. But the Greeks went even further than that. When they looked at their temples and their various structures, the Parthenon, the Temple of Athena, etc., they broke down the different elements on the facades, the dimensions of the height, the dimensions of the frieze and the cella, and all these different parts of the building according to these ratios. And they were precise relationships to each other, because they felt that if they did this, then they would be in unity with, or in harmony with, nature around them. And nowhere is this seen in more dramatic fashion than in the work that they did on the structure of the Parthenon, which is considered the epitome of Greek architecture. So let's take a look at a couple of these elements as it relates to that particular building. In elevation view, we look at the Parthenon and the ratios that they worked with. One of them was not only the golden ratio that we saw earlier, but the ratio of 9:4 for the basic building structure. Proportionally, they had another ratio that was 6:4, and we're going to show you where this came into play. But first of all, the first ratio of 9:4 is evident in the width of the building to the height of its facade, which is a ratio of 9:4. If you look at the width of the columns versus the center line to the columns, this again is repeating that same ratio of 9:4, so everything looks in balance. Another element that came into play where this 6 comes into play, see if we can do this right for you, is that the Greeks took the inner structure of the building, and if you follow the baseline of the inner structure of the building, take it all the way up to the top, and that's not a very straight line, but it'll give you the idea, to the little design along the top edge, and then we come back down. That square that was defined by these dimensions is actually a square that's 6 units by 6 units square. So they would use boxes, rectangles that all had these same relative ratios of 9:4, 6:4, etc. in the building. It even extended to the inside of the building. In plan view, when you look at the Parthenon, it's precisely 4 times to 9 times the width to the length. And it has a ratio, again, of some of the inner structures of 4 to 9 or 9 to 4, even down to the pedestal on which they mounted the statue of the goddess Athena, which also was built to that exact same ratio of 9:4. But interestingly, since they introduced this other proportional ratio in there of 6:4, they didn't locate that pedestal at a ratio of 9:4. They located that ratio, that pedestal, at a ratio of 6:4. And the reason they did this is that 6:4 is another way of expressing the earlier ratio we saw of 3:2, which is the musical notes C and G. And indeed, when you study back all the way through the ancient Greeks in their math, in their music, in their architecture, and in their study of the natural world, the precision and the harmony that bound all of those together drove how it was that they designed their buildings and they carried out their music, that they designed their music, if you will, or they were inspired to write their music. Don't we wish those same mathematicians were around today to work with the Greeks in their financial situation? That would really be a help, huh? Well, let's take this a step further. Having had all of this background before us, the Greeks really, in architecture, for their precision and their art, drive and influence a lot of what follows in the world today. In fact, a few hundred years after the Greeks were no longer the world power on the scene, but the Romans were the world power, the Roman architect Vitruvius, based on all of this design influence that came from the Greek mathematicians and architects, developed 3 further fundamental principles that he felt were essential to architecture. Now, the name Vitruvius may sound familiar to you, and that's because he's the one who's responsible for Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man, the picture of the human body within the circle showing the proportion of the arms and the legs and the body, etc. Vitruvius made this comment in relationship to the fundamentals of good architecture. Function, structure, and beauty were the 3 elements. Function in how a building is used was important because it had to have a practical purpose for what was going on inside of it. If there was no practical purpose for the building, then it was beauty without function. It became sculpture. It was not architecture. On the subject of sculpture, or how a building stands up, Vitruvius said that it has to resist gravity and the loads based on it in order to stand up, but that structural necessity should be created from something beautiful. And that's what differentiates architecture from engineering. So function has to have a purpose. Structure must not be just regular structure, but it must be beautiful structure in order to be architecture. And the third area is beauty itself. A building's visual and sensory appeal was the ultimate test of good architecture, because without beauty, the building was merely a utilitarian structure. It didn't have any, it wasn't really architecture, it was merely something of use. We might liken it to the difference between a tract home today and Frank Lloyd Wright's Falling Waters. Well, it's interesting to look at these elements as far as precision, harmony, music and architecture, and how they play together. But the question is, how does precision and harmony and music and architecture all roll into architectural outdoor lighting? We're going to put one more element in here to bring this thought of how it all marries together and influences the world of outdoor lighting design with an element called the Mozart effect. Now, Mozart's compositions, for whatever reason and for whatever purpose, tend to be a little more mathematically driven than some of the other great composers. This happened to be something that marked his style, something that marked his works. And in the early 90s, there was a study that was conducted by a psychologist on what was called the Mozart effect. They took a group of college-level students and subjected them to test scores while the students were listening to different kinds of music or to no music at all. And consistently, the students tested higher whenever they were listening to music that was composed by Mozart. Now, a lot of studies since that time have tried to put down this theory or this thought or this idea that was called the Mozart effect, but it's been very prevalent over the last 20 years. In fact, about 4 states in the Union actually mandated into their elementary school system that children were supposed to start the day of their school day off listening to 5 minutes worth of classical music by Mozart, thinking that it would improve their test scores. And even those doubters of the Mozart effect, after conducting extensive tests, found that there was something there within the compositions of Mozart, the mathematical equations behind it, the precision behind it, that had some kind of effect on test scores relating to geometry and spatial considerations. Well, that's kind of heady stuff. So we figured we were going to create our own Mozart effect, but we weren't going to do it with just simple Mozart. We were going to take the fundamentals that we learned from Vitruvius, that a building must have function, that components must be able to house optical systems and must be able to produce light, that the structure that supports those buildings must be beautiful. They can't just be simple support structures, that if we're going to put electronics or have some type of electrical component in that structure, that it too must be beautiful, that it all has to marry together to produce a whole unit that we call the Mozart Lantern. This is the new product that you have introduced by Sun Valley that is a blend of precision and harmony, the Mozart Lantern. Now, let's take a look at the Mozart Lantern and its the complete product line and see how it responds or how it conforms to the rules of good architecture, the 3 fundamental principles. First, let's take a look at function, how a building is used. The Mozart Lantern comes in 3 different iterations. You have a flat lens version, you have a version with an opal diffuser, and you have a version with a clear pattern diffuser. In all of these elements, they change the look of the fixture slightly, but in all of these elements, we can add a huge array of optical systems. Vertical, horizontal lamp, HID systems, LED systems using both our VLED and our power array system to be able to accomplish lighting. So certainly the Mozart Lantern satisfies the first fundamental principle of good architecture on how the building is used. The second principle there is structure. We need to create beauty from structural necessity. Well, when we look at the elements in the Mozart Lantern, the arms that support the upper crown, the crown that supports the upper hood in which the optical assembly lays, and then the ballast assembly, the husk at the bottom, which the whole fixture rests upon. When we blend all these things together, can there be any doubt that the structure of this fixture truly is something beautiful? That we've created beauty from the structural necessity, and more than just beauty, we've created a piece that looks like a total and complete unit. Nothing here is out of place. Nothing looks like it's been tacked on. And then the third fundamental principle of good architecture, beauty, the ultimate test. Whether it's beauty in the proportionality of the product line as it relates to the arms and poles and the sizes of fixtures, whether it's beauty in the individual components that relate it to traditional architecture or transitional architecture, there can be little doubt that the Mozart Lantern really meets the three fundamentals of good architecture. The Mozart Lantern is a fixture that truly is a combination of precision and harmony that produces architectural outdoor lighting excellence. Now, in producing this product, the first thing we need to do is get a catalog in your hands. And beginning next week, the bulk mailing for the catalogs will be going out to you for your supply to take into the field. What we want to do is take a quick look at the catalog now and be able to see the elements in there, some of which that you've seen here as we were going through them. First of all, on the catalog, there's a generous photograph on the front cover, kind of an angular view of the flat lens version of the Mozart Lantern with a VLED optical system in it, and you'll notice that it is branded as a Sun Valley product line. The inside front cover and opening spread is a daytime and nighttime view of the luminaire, showing its application in either street lighting, pathway lighting, roadways. There are two sizes of the Mozart Lantern, and so it's applicable in ranges of heights all the way from 10 to 25 feet. And you can also put it in twin mounts and such, so there's a lot of variety here in its application. And in the fixture configurations, the next two-page spread gives us the variety of appearances, the aesthetic appearances of the Mozart Lantern. Now, we've broken these down as the flat lens version, which is the MOZ, the -WA for the opal white diffuser version, and then the CPA for the clear patterned acrylic enclosure, which has a huge variety of optical capabilities behind it. The look of the Mozart Lantern is tremendously influenced by the pole on which it is mounted. If you take and mount it to a fluted pole with a decorative base, for example, it's the ideal fixture in order to complement traditional architecture. If you go with a more simple design as far as the pole and base is concerned, transitional architecture is absolutely perfect for the Mozart Lantern. So whether it's hard traditional or more modern type of look, the Mozart Lantern is suitable for this. We also give you a two-page spread in here that gives you some suggested combinations of poles and arms with various bases and such, showing it an in scale so that you see the height arrangements and etc. And then we give you a breakdown of the individual components of the product line. The Mozart Lantern is a cast aluminum product. It's cast of a low copper content aluminum alloy, minimum 1/4-inch wall thickness. The lenses then that accompany that are also made of either a white acrylic diffuse material or the clear patterned acrylic, depending upon which optical system you want to put in there. And the optical systems are endless as far as the various arrays. Vertical and horizontal lamp in HID, LED power array optics in both the vertical and angled array, and also the VLED optics, and a unitized electrical module, whether it's an HID ballast assembly, electronic or core and coil, or whether it's a VLED, or excuse me, a driver module for LEDs. We also show you a cutaway of the, or excuse me, not a cutaway, but an open version of the fixture so you can see where these various components apply. We then go through a little more explanation or extensive description of the optical systems because we want everyone to understand that the Mozart Lantern is not only a good-looking fixture, but a performer as well, whether it's with the HID optics, whether it's with the various systems in the LED power array, or whether it's with the VLED optical module. There's a tremendous amount of application flexibility that is embodied within this fixture. In the specification pages, you'll notice that you have two different sizes for the Mozart Lantern, and in keeping with the idea of proportionality is rather interesting. When you look at this, you'll notice that the large fixture is 26 inches across, and from the lens to the bottom of the husk is also 26 inches. There's your perfect square. The smaller fixture is 20 inches by 20 inches. We've broken down the specifications so that we have the unified components, the fixture, housing, and the finish in one place, and then over the next 3 columns, over the next 2 pages, we give you a spec for the HID products, and then we give you our HID components, and then a specification for the LED power array, and a specification for the VLED module, depending upon which one you're using within the luminaire and what type of lens diffuser enclosure that you're using. Now at the bottom of page 15, below the VLED optical module, we have a little break here. We've put the notes for the lamp electrical data because we don't have enough room on the lamp electrical data page to put these notes. The reason for that is that we've included a generous number of lamps in both high pressure sodium and metal halide, and also the LED arrays on this page. And we haven't included everything that's possible only because there are so many variations possible. Now, in the configuration pages that we're going to look at in a moment that follow, all of those configuration pages have the lamp modes reflected in the lamp electrical guide. But some of the lamps in the lamp electrical guide are not reflected in the configuration pages, only because for purposes of a lack of space. We're trying to explain, or trying to illustrate to you here, the tremendous flexibility that exists within this product line. But with that flexibility could come confusion if we didn't handle it properly. So in the catalog, we've broken down the configuration pages, the spec ordering configuration pages, into 6 individual pages. One relating to the flat lens HID version or the flat lens LED version, one relating to the opal diffuser HID version or the opal diffuser LED version, and one relating to the clear pattern diffuser HID version versus the clear pattern enclosure in the LED version. So it makes it very simple to specify and get to the right fixture configuration in this catalog. And then on the back page, we have a nice generous view of, again, the Mozart Lantern with the opal diffuser that's on it. Now, when you look at all of this, you can see that there's a lot of work that's gone into the Mozart Lantern. The samples will be available right after the first of the year because we want you to get the small version when it comes to the samples. The larger fixture is just a little bit too large. The large fixture is available now. It is ready for shipment. The smaller fixture will be ready for shipment by the end of January. The Mozart Lantern will carry with it a 50% enhancement on all orders that include the Mozart Lantern through June 30th of 2012. Now notice that's not on all fixtures, that's on all orders. So if you have an order that has the Mozart Lantern with poles, bases, and such, the poles and bases and all are all subject to that same 50% enhancement on commission. And this is a Sun Valley branded product. So the 15% base commission rate applies. That means the 50% commission enhancement will pay you 22.5% commission at book price through June 30th of 2012. It's a pretty generous commission investment there, or commission payout there, because we need you to spend the time getting this fixture into the field, into the mind of the specifier, and getting this fixture specified. This is the way we can compensate you for your return on investment for the energy spent. And specify you must, because the Mozart Lantern is an original. The Mozart Lantern meets the fundamental principles of good architecture and requires your work in this regard. And the Mozart Lantern needs, well, no, that's not right. That's not a good word for it. It's something the Mozart Lantern deserves. No, that's not any good either. Mozart Lantern demands to be specified. It is not a VE product. You will not be successful selling the Mozart Lantern if you treat it as such. You must get out there with this fixture and create projects with this fixture. Get your specifiers to use it as the standard on your jobs, and then you will be most successful. And certainly with the resources that you have and with the tools that you have here in this fixture, in this luminaire, you have the ability to do that. Again, the Mozart Lantern gives you 3 different aesthetic variations on the body style, on the look of the fixture, the building, if you will. You have 2 different fixture housing sizes to conform to the proportionality. And all of the elements here, the structural elements, are certainly beautiful. You have a wide variety of optical systems to put within it. There's nothing about this fixture that's lacking when it comes to its application in the field. Truly, the Mozart Lantern is the embodiment of everything that we've been working at U.S. Architectural and Sun Valley over the last 3 years in terms of innovation, quality, performance, cutting-edge technology, and architectural relevance and integrity. We need you to get out there and specify this product today. We need you to get out there with the thought in mind that this is the new U.S. Architectural and Sun Valley lighting, and we need you to get out there and promote the Mozart Lantern. This brings an end to our webcast. We want to thank you for your attendance and for your attention to it. And if you have any questions, please be sure to send them in to us and we will respond.